All right, on recording. And give a couple minutes for everybody to come in. It's slotted for 8 p.m. I actually had a bit of a challenge in between my panels. I left my office door open and one of my cats ran amok. And she stole my bow sister. But I have backups that are close. So that's what we'll be using. But we'll jump on the bow sister here once we actually start.
Joe, just to make sure right before, do you want me to read off the questions as they come up, or are you going to be looking at chat and going through it yourself?
If you could, that would be great.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, that way I can look at the mini, but I will try to keep on top. But if I miss any, please.
Absolutely, can do.
It'll be interesting to see what all factions win by the end of today.
Are you hoping for a specific one?
Well, I'm Archon, so I'd love to see them win, but I also always root for an underdog. So I'm pretty open. I don't have a big preference, but
It's a good political answer.
I try to be as political as possible because you never know. You never know. For this one here, I can definitely say that I've spread the word that people should join, and particularly if they're going to participate, to Archon. So that's where I lean the most.
I think Archon was doing pretty good in the poll for the last class that I admin for, so maybe your words have been swaying a few people.
Oh. But yeah, if not, it's not gonna break my heart too bad. Just give me a little sad face to put on my wall. As everybody trickles in, I'm just prepping up my paints here, getting them out. Since I'm in my office and away from my painting desk, I'm not using my wet palette. So I'm trying to keep my paints as fresh as possible. Make sure I don't mix up my rinse cup with my coffee cup. Yeah, I saw a couple of people really talking about the Rutarki. So it looks like they're currently the underdogs. We'll see how that plays out. They were getting pretty vocal in a couple of the Discord channels earlier, some of the chats. So we'll see. It looks like they're trying to make a big comeback.
Maybe they can drum up some support.
Today was a pretty busy day. So much going on. It was pretty exciting to see.
I know you've been doing classes mostly all day, but do you get to check out any of the other ones during your downtime?
Yeah, so in between, I've gone in and I've done one with Ian. I did the podcast one because I also do, so I've got a YouTube channel. So I kind of wanted to see some of the variances and just listen to some of the different equipment that's recommended and everything, and take that in. I watched about half of the crystals one. I thought that was great. I actually got to utilize that on a mini that I was working on. So whenever I get to actually utilize it with something I'm working on, I really love those. But I did a lot yesterday too. So just so many.
What's been your favorite class so far? Besides your own, obviously.
No, actually, I can tell you that Aaron's on the monstrous skin tones, probably so far my favorite. Absolutely blew me away with, just the way she utilizes some of the color theory, picking out some of the different skin tones. So I play around with that to some degree, but I haven't really stepped outside the box as far. And some of the examples that she had were just absolutely great.
I heard good things about that one from the mod who was in the room. We were all kind of comparing notes yesterday and it sounded like a lot of fun.
Yeah, so many times she just does the regular skin tones. So when I saw this one, I thought, well, I've watched her skin tone once. I watched it twice at ReaperCon, but then I've also looked at some of her streamings where she's working on skin tones. So with this one being the monster skin tones, as a DM, I use more monsters than humanoids. So I really took a lot away from it.
That's awesome. I'm glad you're getting to enjoy the event as well as help other people enjoy it then.
Yeah, absolutely. Depending on ReaperCon, whether or not we're live or virtual for that. If it's virtual again, I'm thinking about doing one for pinning. I was kind of surprised that there weren't. They talked a little bit about it in the conversions, but not a whole ton. And so I definitely want to jump out and do a pinning one at some point.
That would be awesome. I know it got mentioned in a couple of the classes. I think in the eye one yesterday, the painting eyes is secretly easy. Then they were talking about modifications a little bit.
See, and that's one I thought about going to, but I had too much overlap, so I wasn't able to. But I thought about it.
Well, the good news is you'll be able to watch it whenever it comes up on the YouTube channel. It was a lot of fun. I got to mod that one and it was really, really interesting.
Nice. Yeah, that's one I'm definitely looking forward to. Eyes, I don't mind them as much. I know a lot of people dread them. I don't mind them, but I'm always looking for ways to improve. So any little bits I get, I was put in the library and make sure I'm working on getting better.
Yeah, he had some really great tips. And then I was in the Fun Faces with Ian Markin earlier, and he did some really interesting, he was doing it on a chibi miniature, and he got to really focus on the eyes and how to put emotion into them and things like that.
Sweet. Yeah, I'll have to check that one out too.
Yeah, highly recommend. Well, it's 8 o'clock, so whenever you're ready, then we've got a couple of people in here. So
All
Should be all
right.
good to go.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So don't hesitate. And welcome. If you've got questions, please ask away. I am just going to make sure I've got the Q&A open as well. So go ahead and post your questions. If I do miss them, the moderator will jump in as we have a moment to make sure that those are getting asked. Part of the class supplies listed having the bow sister along with 3 colors of paint. Don't panic if you don't have the bow sister or those colors of paint. We'll talk about it. My bow sister, actually, I believe my cat has taken while I was in between panels and brought into the couch. So I've got a couple of other models that we'll be using. But the bow sister, I really picked that one because it's one of my favorite sculpts. When I was new to Reaper and just starting to purchase minis here and there, Bobby Jackson's sculpts just really blew me away. And this, Heather, is the basing panel or class, if you will. So the bow sister, I really loved the sculpt. And the first time I painted it, absolutely loved it. I've painted it several times. As I said, it's one of my favorite sculpts. Correct, ground effects basing. Thank you, Maud. And I wanted to use that mini because so many of the time, no worries about the supplies list. We'll be talking about it in general. And you'll be able to use these on any type of minis. I wanted to start with that one because the slot bases, anytime you're getting a mini with a slot base, it's going to come with a base. So you don't have to worry about a separate purchase of a base and a mini. Everything is all included for you to be able to get it in place, painted, and then placed on the table. So slot bases are great for that. However, there are opportunities if you have a broccoli base or a sculpted base mini. A lot of the things we're going to talk about are going to work exactly the same on that. It's just that it does require an additional base to go through the steps that we'll cover. So that's why I chose a slotted base mini and why it was the bow sister, because it's just my favorite sculpt from Bobby Jackson and love seeing it. So make sure if you have pre-painted and prepped up that bow sister in the Discord channel for Joe Oakes, pop a picture of it in there because I love to see how people paint it, the colors they use and the different type of basing that they put her on. So starting with the mini on a slot base that's painted and sealed and a work of art, a masterpiece that you were able to utilize a lot of the virtual expo classes to fine-tune details, work on eyes, non-metallic metals, buttery blends. Once you have that mini on the base, painted and sealed, sealed being the important part, I use dull coat. If you have a different item that you prefer, just whatever you're sealing it with, nice and matte. On the bow sister, you'll notice there's generally on one side or another just an open part that the slotted base does not fit completely into. Army Painter Anti-Shine is a great one. So if you're dealing with any of the slot base minis and you see that gap, never panic. There are a couple of things that you can do to close that up. Starting with using just a touch of green stuff. Make sure you're wearing your gloves. Roll up a small ball of it, pop it in there and just lay it flat so it's nice and smooth. A very cheap and easy trick that I'm actually going to do live right now, which can be a little more challenging, but I just use a little bit of PVA glue, 50-50 PVA glue and water, and a touch of paper towel. You want to soak it in that PVA and water blend and just scrunch it in there. Because the PVA I'm going to be using for static grass and flock, I've already got it prepped and on the table, ready to go. A lot of the steps that we'll be covering here, you may not be able to follow along completely with your one finished mini. Don't worry about that. The steps are very easy, and even after the class, you can complete them out. By utilizing the PVA and water, it does have a longer drying time. So just be aware of that. A lot of the steps will need to dry and may take some time. So I've just got my slot filled in, and it's now just a smooth, even surface. One thing I will say with the slotted base minis, if ever you have a desire, you can also lift those up just slightly, not push them all the way down in. And that gives your basing opportunity to go under the foot so that it looks like your mini is actually on the ground and you don't have to worry about almost a depression that the feet are in. One of the big bonuses of actually basing with broccoli bases or sculpted bases is that they sit above any of the basing effects that you do on the mini. So just something to think about. So we've got our mini, the hole plugged, it's painted, it's sealed, it's ready to go. That can actually go right onto the table and be used without a problem. As a gamer, the minis for me are most important to be used on the table. I do some displays, I do some conversion exchanges, and I do some competition, but in total, that's only about 10% of the minis I paint. Most of the minis I paint, I do it because I use them on the table. So durability and tabletop use is the most important thing for me to be aware of. But as is, this is plenty to go onto the table and be utilized for a player character. But people are visual creatures. We love seeing things, and the more punch that we give to the minis, the more impact it has to the players, to the setting, and overall helping with tying in your hobby of painting minis onto tabletop use. Being creative and just having details really stand out on close inspection make all the world of difference. So my process, and I've got a couple of minis, so you'll see them switch. This one was the closest I had to my missing Bo sister. I think I'm being held prisoner by, or I think she's being held hostage by my cat. But process-wise, tools I use are going to be very simple. On the supply list, we had the mini, and then we had 3 paints, and that was grass green, pale green, and pure white. In addition, some of the things I'm going to use, you don't have to, but I'll use some muddy brown, some earth brown, and some leather brown, and just in the process that I'm doing. I'm going to take you step by step on how I prep these from just a raw base to a display base that has actual characteristics to it. And I know my light isn't fantastic on this, so a little more challenging to see. But when you're seeing the two side by side on a table, really makes a world of difference. Any questions so far? Perfect. So here is where you get an opportunity. If anybody ever buys you brushes for birthdays, Christmas, any special occasions, they'll generally get you synthetic brushes. Don't despair, those are fantastic for basing needs. Synthetics or older worn brushes, if you ever start getting a hook tip or any fraying or separating of hairs, make sure you save those because for basing, they're ideal. Synthetic especially because they clean easy and you can really put them through the ringer and not worry about destroying an expensive brush. So process-wise, what we're going to do is just use some PVA or white school glue We don't give any names, or I try not to, of course, for any type of legality reasons. And water. My mix is 50-50 glue to water. And it's pretty standard in all types of miniature and terrain building. You'll see that formula a lot. So just 50-50, mix it up. And then all you'll do is paint the base. And I did not have this set up for multi-cameras. So I'm going to just do it within view. And this mini, if you look and notice, there's actually a rock on the back. So that's just a stone right out the backyard that had some cool features, and I super glued that on. If you're out in the park, out in your yard, don't ever hesitate to pick up twigs, stones, pine needles, even acorn tops, mosses, anything like that. They work great for dressing up your minis. So all I did was take that and put it into dirt, 2 tablespoons right out of the backyard. Super easy. You can use all different types of materials to do this. There are all different types and grades of talus. Sand also works fantastic. For me, I just have a bowl with a couple tablespoons of dirt, PVA glue, water, dirt. Super simple, super easy. Once that's dried, I'm going to switch on to a different mini now. What I do is make sure I brush it off, let it just make sure it's 100% dried. And then I actually go through and paint that. And that's where I use the browns. So starting out with a muddy brown, I just go through and paint all of the dirt. This is where you want a little bit finer of a synthetic, just because you're painting around the feet of the miniature. You don't want to overlap what you've already painted. Though if you do, your mini should already be sealed, and you should be able to quickly, with a clean brush, just use water to wash that paint away. Once you get that, I start with the earth brown, and it's just a good medium brown. And one of the interesting things about ground and dirt specifically, it's actually a lot lighter than you think. If you go out to just a dry patch in your lawn or in the park, dirt is actually really light. If you start digging, it's darker. That's because of the moisture in the dirt. So earth brown works great as a mid-tone for it. And then my muddy brown, I just water it down and use it just like a wash. That gets in and gets everything deep. And with that, I'm able to show some good differentiation between the kind of moister, more low dirt and the higher levels where it's drier and more arid. And I'm just doing this on the fly, so bear with me. And with this here, you can skip this step. If you're going more for speed and you just want to pop something down, you can skip this step. This is just something that I really like to do because I think it gives just another dimension to the mini when it's on the table. Now, some of the variations you can do with this are if you've got, say, you're playing Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition and you're in an Underdark campaign, instead of using browns, use blacks and grays. If you're in an Icewind Dale, use blues and whites. The material, the dirt, you can paint any color you want and it'll still come out really well. And you can put all of the miniatures. Yeah, give me 1 second. I'm going to dry brush real quick. You can put all of the miniatures on the same style of brushes to show that campaign. So here he is with, this is, again, my camera isn't going to show this fantastic, but this is the earth brown and then just a wash of muddy brown right on top of dirt. And this one has been sitting for 2 days, so plenty ability for the dirt to dry. Where we started at before that dirt dried was just, you can see some wet spots in there from where it's still wet, but just a light tan. Excuse me. So far, is that making sense for everybody? Any big questions on any of the steps I'm doing? I know we haven't gotten to use the greens yet, but we are getting there. Oh, good, good, good. All right. So the next step I'm going to do is with the leather brown. I actually mix it with just a touch of earth brown. And this one here is where your paper towel is going to come in super handy. And I am just going to do a little bit of light dry brushing. And if you're just joining in, or I may have said it a little earlier, I'm actually in my office, not at my painting desk. So I'm a little out of my element here, but I grabbed all the supplies I felt I would need so that we can do this live. And I can actually show you the steps I take. Not perfect, but dry brushing on that lighter brown now gives us a third depth. So we've got a dark brown shadow in the wash. We've got the medium that we put on, and then now just a dry brush. So generally, and again, these can work for multiple colors. If you're playing in a more whimsical world and your grounds are purples, you can use the same process for that. Generally, at this point here, what I do is just make sure the sides of the base are all cleaned up. If this were for, almost dropped it. If this were for a player character, I would actually paint these sides. And that's one of the things I do for players in my campaigns. If they have any miniatures, is I paint the sides their favorite color so they can see them on a map easier. But for exchanges or anything like that, I am just leaving the sides black. At that point, normally what I'll do is go through and spray this with a sealant. As long as I'm sure that all of the dirt is attached well, all the paint is dry, everything is good. I'm not worried about any of the materials going up and sticking to the mini. I've already sealed the mini. I could reseal this and now give a protective coat onto the ground effects that I've already got painted, which really helps as you're using these on the table and they're being moved around. You've just got to be aware that you can get some wear on the edges of any of the ground effects that you're putting, especially if you're adding things like stone or any bits of twigs to represent logs and the limbs, anything like that. So generally I'll go through and spray it. Now I've got an additional mini that I'm just going to do the same process with real quick. And this one, I'm not as concerned about the sealing. And so I've already got this one, its first 2 tones. So I'm just going through and doing a dry brush highlight. That way I've got 2 to play around with you. Like I said, normally I would seal these. These ones I'm not going to because we're going to be doing these live. And I really wanted to show you the kind of variations once you get into the ground basing. And again, for me, the reason this is important is because I do use the majority of my miniatures, about 90%, on the table. So these aren't super fantastic detailed display minis that you're going to enter into competitions. While I do loving those, my concern is more about on the tabletop. How can we make them beautiful yet durable? Here we go. For characters, oh, that's a great question. Colors that don't match the ground color, but for monsters, I just use black. Yes and no. So for player characters, whenever I have a character that represents a miniature that represents one of my player characters, so I'm generally a GM. And for each of my campaigns, I paint a mini for each of my players. It's for a couple of reasons, but primarily as a thank you for them taking the time to make sure they meet up for game night. It's my carrot to lead them in and keep them at the game. So for these, I always ask them what their favorite color is. Whatever their favorite color is, I'm going to use that on the side of the base, and then I'm going to incorporate it in the mini. This goes in for a couple of reasons. So these two minis are in the same campaign. You can see one is a green and one is orange. They can quickly and easily see them on the table, recognize their color, and know who they are and where they're at. So that I'll do for players. For monsters, there's lots of dependent. So depending on the size, here is a frost giant with a blue rim. That makes all the difference because the mini bases aren't always the same depth or height from monsters on. For exchanges and any smaller minis, I'll generally keep those black. So villains and monsters, let's see, well, here is a rust monster that is black. Yeah, the painting them for the players, their favorite color, those are fantastic. And even if you're playing on virtual tabletop, you can use, instead of the tokens, you can take a photo of that mini and use that as their token. Fantastic way to drive immersion and for them to really feel part of the game. I love it. It's worked wonders for me. So I highly recommend trying that. But once we have the groundwork done, it's still much better than what we had at first, where it was just a mini on a base. For this one, we're going to focus on static grass, but there are a lot of elements you can add to your base to even make it that much better. With tabletop, you have to be very mindful of placement and what you put on it, because unlike a display, these are going to get fingered a lot. My two favorite things to use are flocking, which you can get in fine grades in lots of different colors, and static grass. For me, I have multiple colors of static grass, but the one that I buy in bulk is a dark green. I do that because it's also the most versatile. Flocking, we'll do real quick, just some small flocking elements. I'm going to use the mini that I'm going to go back and forth between the two that we just did. Yeah, the token stamp. Yep. Free tokens that you can make. And yeah, use the photos of the miniatures that you paint until you're able to get around the table. Fantastic way for them to see the work that you did, for them to have actual representation in the game. And it's something that's unique. And again, players, in my experience, it really connects with them and makes them feel part of the campaign, feel appreciated. So for the mini, I just went back to my PVA and water mixture. I'm just going to pick out a couple of dots of area. Now, if we were doing the bow sister together, you would see I place a lot in between the legs. And I try to avoid a lot of the edges for this first step, just because the edges get the most fingering. And again, I want these to be able to be on the table for many, many sessions. So I just go through and give myself a couple of decent puddles of PVA glue right onto the base. Of course, generally that would already be sealed. And then for flock, I'm today just using it's a medium green mixture. This has got 2 different types of green and a touch of yellow. This flock, you just sprinkle lightly on right over top of where you have the glue. It doesn't take much, just a very little bit. Now the flocking, I actually got introduced from Battletech as we're making some scenic elements. The flocking was a great way to make it look grassy in a huge area, really quick and easy. So I've stuck with flocking for a many number of years, but I'm just going to give that a moment to sit, and we'll come back to shake it off and see how that flocking has stuck. So I use that, like I said, with the bow sister specifically in between the legs and kind of in a central area. That flocking, once it's complete, is going to look like kind of trimmed grass, very low vegetation, maybe moss. If you're from the Pacific Northwest, you know all about moss lawns. So now we're going to switch to the next one, and we're going to do a little bit of the static grass. Now on the bow sister, I would then put this more around the feet of the mini, and then closer to the edge, not quite to the edge, but closer to the edge. And process is going to be exactly the same to start. Now there are lots of tools you can use for static grass. Oregon, you know all about it then. Mossy lawns. For a while, my family, we lived in the Pacific Northwest in Washington State. And the first place we lived, the lawn was nothing but moss. So very inspiring, very beautiful. And really got me thinking more about how to utilize some of that flocking with different foliage pieces as well. But also, if you put rocks, or maybe you're using ruins elements, little bits that you're doing, think about it just like a lawn. Anywhere that you have areas that aren't going to get mowed, right? The wild goats aren't going to be able to trim it quite as evenly as the rest of it. So look for elements that you've built in, maybe even by accident. Now, if you're just using a couple of tablespoons of dirt out of the yard, you can get some clumps and some smaller stones that may build up in that. And as you're basing, they'll be applied to it. So what I'm doing here is just taking the static grass right out of the container, and I've rolled it around a little bit in my fingers. And I'm just applying it to areas where I put the dabs of PVA and water glue. Now, there's a lot more fancy ways to do this. I guarantee you, on YouTube, you could find 5,000 hours to watch how to do static grass and do it really well. I'm doing a quick tutorial that we're just going to cover for tabletop use. So once that's on, I'm going to give it just a second. I turn it upside down and give it a shake. And then I'm actually going to blow up into it. That's going to help it come down so that when we turn it over, it's up like grass. This isn't foolproof. It isn't going to be perfect. As I said, there are many ways that you can do this with electronics. Let's see, here's a quick question. Do you usually paint dirt but leave flock the color it has? Yes, just because flock has so many different colors, and I try to use flock more minimalistic. So I I've really got like 5 colors of flock. One is a darker green. I call it dry green because it looks more like dry grass, which is probably what I use the most. And then I've got a richer green, which I call spring green. I've got one that's more browns and yellows mixed into it, so it looks like fall grass is what I call it. I've got one that actually has some reds in it to almost emulate flowers, but generally flock, as colored as it is, ties in really well, right? Woodland Scenics, great variety. That's actually where I buy mine, or Woodland Scenics. But yeah, Gale Force 9 also makes good ground effect pieces. And now we'll set that one down. We've had them upside down for a bit. Let that get drying. We'll come back to this one, and because of the flock, the first thing I want to do is just shake it off back over the flock. And then again, I just give it a quick blow. And again, I know this camera is not set up great for this, but there are a couple of elements. Let me see about altering this light a little bit and see if that helps any. Where the kind of green will stand out from the brown. And I'm a finger in the mini all wrong, but that's okay. Again, tabletop use, just think about tabletop use. And again, I go more sparingly on the flock. I generally don't use very much on the mini. If you have the bow sister right between the legs, you want almost like a landing strip. Sorry, right on the base, just to show that kind of color differentiation, that bit of grass. And then around that is where you want to put the static grass. But the flock, despite what colors you're using, use that just to show almost trimmed grass, where the PCs are standing or have walked, anything like that, where they're pressing it in, or in areas where it's more low vegetation is great for things like that. And again, mosses, things like that. Now we're going to start using the greens that were listed in the supply chart. Green grass, pale green, pure white. I've already got them on my palette. I'm just going to add just a touch of flow improver. Just because I'm not using my wet palette, I just want to make sure that they're of a good consistency. And clean my brush out really good. I'm kind of like Ian, I love a clean brush. I clean, probably too much. And dry that off. So process-wise, because the majority of what I use is a very dark green, I find that works for all different types of grasses that I use on the bases. Again, depending on what you're using for the flock, the different colors, you can have different colorations on your grass and show different seasons, whether it's fall, spring, summer. You know, make them as whimsical as you want. I've done a mini on a base where I used pinheads and colored those, and then made the grasses actually purples. So you can do all kinds of crazy things. Processes are going to be the same. Colors are all up to you. So, oh yeah, thank you, moderator, for putting the colors up there. We're going to take the mini that we put the static grass on. We've given it a couple minutes to dry. And generally, you're going to give yourself a little bit more time to let these dry. But the static grass itself is very dark. And just against that brown, the color that I mostly use is pretty dark color. So what I'm going to do is using my first green, which is the grass green, I'm just going to go through and lightly paint the grass. Believe it or not, like vacuuming the desert to get it clean, we're going to paint the grass. And generally, if you give this a good couple hours to dry, you're not going to have any challenges. We may pick up a couple of the bits of static grass onto our brush. When you're doing any of these basing techniques, of course, make sure you're done painting everything else, or have separate water. And like I said earlier, different brushes. Any of your synthetics that you get as gifts or by yourself, any of your older worn brushes, you want to make sure that you're not using your good brushes for this. So process-wise, let's see, I may have to move that light a little bit. What we've done is moved from a very dark green. Well, that might be too much. Find a good bit here. We've just started to lighten that dark green. So that was the grass green. And then if you're familiar with any type of blending or dry brushing, you know, the next step is to use the pale green. Where we painted the green, we're just going to paint again, only about half to a third of what we previously painted. Further up to the top, this is going to show where the grass is more sun bleached or exposed. And again, depending on the colors you're doing, if you were to do, say, a fall color, I would still start with the dark green, and then I would move into a medium brown. And then for the highest color, I would go to a pale yellow. And because we're using less paint on less product, we're able to get that done pretty quick. And again, I know the camera is not great, but I will post pictures of these as well, so you can see where we've gotten to. But you can start to see that the grass has gone from the darkest green to a medium green to a light green. So you've got good tonal color transitions. Now the last step, of course, is our pure white. Let me get a little flow improver here. Just make sure we get this really, we don't want it thin like a wash, but because I'm in my office, it's a little drier. There we go. I hope everybody's thumbs are good and covered after the virtual expo. With that many, again, here what we're going to do is just very, very lightly touch the tops. This is the area of the grass that is the most exposed to the sun, the lightest color, and just gets the very lightest bit of your paint. To be very selective, this, I would say, of all of them, is the step you want to take the most amount of time on, just because you want nice tips without covering up your other grass colors. What that's going to do is on your grass edges, see if we can get that in camera here. And again, I'll post pictures of these in the on my channel afterwards. But that just gives that grass, you can actually see, if you had taken a picture when we first applied, you could not see that at all. Now, we've got elements of grass around the miniature. And again, on this one, near the back side, I looked at where there were a couple of larger areas, so almost stones, right, in comparison to the mini, and put them more around there so that it looks like it's growing up kind of around the rock, which you would see in nature. When you combine the flocking just very lightly in select areas with the static grass, together, the two of them really gives you a more scenic area for your miniature to be. And it doesn't take much, but when you put one of the scenic pieces on the table compared to just an exposed piece, it just elevates your game like nobody's business. Any big questions before we jump on to the next part? Excuse me. No, it's not COVID. Sonia, you said, yes, you have a question? Maybe typing. Okay. Didn't you learn this by doing or from some specific source? Ooh, great question. Great question. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Sonia. So I can tell you for me, I learned about 60% from everybody else, maybe 70%, maybe 75%. For me, when I started painting, my painting journey is actually pretty long. It started, I would guess, maybe in the 80s, mid 80s, late 80s. My brother was much bigger into miniature painting. We were all into gaming, but he was much bigger into miniature painting. I think it's because he could afford it, and I was still just a kid. But occasionally he would let us paint a mini if we saved up our allowance and got a mini. They never looked fantastic. Of course, we're using testers, enamels, and everything. When I got back into mini painting in 2000, the images that I was seeing online blew me away, and I wanted to emulate it. And so I studied a lot. I did a lot of exchanges and contests, but I also did a lot of research. The Reaper tutorials on the forums have a fantastic amount of information for everything from beginner to advanced. I definitely, yes, late 80s kid. I definitely recommend checking out the forums. I also put my work out there, and as challenging as it was, listened to critiques and got information. But the community itself, that's one of the things that Reaper has neck and shoulders above everybody else, is the community. Nobody hoards information. Everybody's going to be upfront and honest with you and try to help you get better. So the community was another opportunity where I was able to just get a flood of information. So that was a large part of how I learned. But then, yeah, doing was another part, because as you learn information and techniques and different paint theories and color theories and all of this, you got to put it into practice, and you're going to mess up. So you just keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. So I would say about 75% is information that I garnered from around me, and 25% from doing. One of the things that I wanted to talk about was, with this technique, you can expand on it and do it bigger and better as you go forward. If you're looking at more display bases or anything like that, let me see how we're doing on time. Okay, yeah, good on time. As you're doing anything like that, you're incorporating things like more fantastic scenery, adding resin water effects, things like that. The basics are still going to be the same. Again, for me, I focus the majority of mine, probably 90% of the minis that I paint are for use on the tabletop, but it's very scalable. And you'll find as you get into scalability on some of these, you're able to go even more and more insane. So this one here is a giant where I was able to use just elements of moss. You can see where there's flocking. You can see where there's some static grass, and then moss that actually has like almost flowers in it. And just a touch of paint on them made them just really pop out of what's now bushes, even though it's, you know, tiny amounts of moss. But you're able to really scale it and use it on your tables like crazy. Again, the beautiful thing about it is it's very minimalistic, so it doesn't get destroyed on the table. You can really use it on the table. Thank you. I appreciate that. And again, by changing colors, you can do a lot of different aspects using the same techniques. I thought I had it next to me, but I don't. So the same techniques I used in this video, I used for a lava base. Again, just everything is exactly the same, utilizing, starting with just PVA and into dirt and painting and sealing. Now that one doesn't have any type of foliage, of course, but you could put small elements of twigs and paint them as though they're burnt and charred. So many opportunities to put little bits here and there that add so much dimension to your tabletop that almost elevate it into display area. But the durability and opportunity to put that on your table is going to put you just at a whole new level. When you see the videos of the guy with the massive terrain and he's getting ready for a game and he uses his vape and fills it up with smoke, it's almost that level of epicness that your players will feel when you start putting things like this down on the table. It really draws them into your game. One that I'm working on now, it's the same technique. It's got a ways to go, but I just painted a blight fang, and this is actually going to be an ice base. But you can see elements are exactly the same. And I had more base to work with. So around the sculpted bases, I started putting in some bits of cork and rock to start building up glacier aspects or icy aspects. I'm going to put a couple of plants actually in there and make them look as though they're frozen suddenly. I don't want it to just be a barren landscape. I still want a few elements that are going to be frosted and frozen to show that this dragon came in and just froze what was normally there. So any other questions on basing for tabletop? I know we're getting close to time. We still got a little bit. Again, if you have painted your bow sister, how long do I plan on doing ice? I'll answer that in two ways because I'm not sure exactly how you mean. So I plan on the ice taking probably about, I would guess, 4 hours total time because I've still got to build up some elements of it and then paint and seal it and then start putting those pieces on. For materials. So for me, it's very simple. If I've got good small stones or aquarium rock, actually is what I prefer. I'll use those, but then also bits of cork because cork just looks really good as in, kind of broken, rough stone. And then again, just into dirt. And then I'm going to use static grass. And I've got a couple of small pieces of moss that I thought were really cool looking. Not quite as big as on the hill giant, but small bits of moss that I just saw on a tree at the local park. And I've always got little containers on me that I can put things in. But I'm going to put those in. And then for the frost effect, I'm going to use paint. So after it's painted and sealed and then the elements put on, I'm going to lightly dust them with a very light blue and then white. And really that's about it. I've got some, it's similar to Flock, but it's a snow effect from Woodland Scenics that I'll put on top of everything to show kind of a buildup of snow. That's a little more challenging to do because a lot of times it looks more like slush. So you really have to play with the materials to know. Do you ever make custom bases with resin or some other materials? I do. I do. I've actually got a really cool one. We've got a couple of minutes. Do I scatter terrain? Yes, quite a bit. Very much, very much. So I also use a lot of like ruins. So I do a lot of molding with Hearst Arts blocks, and anything that doesn't turn out great, I use on bases for more like scenic bases. As far as custom bases, I do a lot of wood bases as well, to where I'll get a block of wood and sand it down really nice. And I look for ones with really good character and stain and seal them. And I'll use those for display minis. Again, I don't do a whole lot of those. For me, it's more about using on the tabletop. What do I use for water materials? Oh, okay, Mod Podge for depth, yes. So I can tell you I've played with Mod Podge a lot, both the matte as well as the gloss. Resin, for me, is probably my go-to, but in the past, I've also used Woodland Scenic's water effects. That's really good, especially if you're needing just smaller amounts, but it is more expensive too. So it's kind of a, where you're at for budget and quantities, what you're needing. Let's see. Oh, thank you, Mod. Says we can go over a bit if we keep getting questions. So if you have questions, let me know. I'll actually grab one of the bases that I just did. It'll just take a second. I'm just going to go to my workstation. I'll be right back. Let me grab one that I just made. All right. Thank you for your patience. Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's this is my office, so I had to have something background because I do a lot of YouTube, and I needed something very decorative. Yes, water bases are very interesting. I've seen some fantastic ones on both the Reaper forms as well as like Cool Mini or Not that I just fell in love with. So fantastic. I want to do more. Again, my focus is on tabletop, so I don't dedicate a whole lot of time onto display. Though it is very passionate for me, I don't do it. So a couple of the bases that I'm working on now, this is one. Oh, that light is just a challenge. There we go, a little bit better. Very rough, very rough. So these minis I just pinned rather than put on bases, and I'm building up a display base where these are going to be ruins kind of in grass, and they're on a platform. That'll also be covered with some grasses and bits of leaves. But just I loved the wood grain on the base. So that's one example of a more display base. That one you'll actually see entered if you're doing the Reaper challenges, which I highly recommend because it really makes you push yourself. But that one's going to be entered for the, I'm hoping, the Q1 diorama. And then this is actually a resin base that I made. This was going to be initially, as I was working on Blightfang, I was thinking on how I could make kind of an icy tundra and everything. So this is one that I just played with. And I thought it came out fantastic. It's very crystalline and icy, but also rough. But it's got the right, I tried to make it almost grid-like. So it's the right size and close to shape to use on tabletop. But I would go through, this was just with a mold turned inside out. So it's got some support on the inside, but it's for, so I make a lot of dice boxes. I do a lot of game aids. I don't, my partner does. But it's a mold that we do with the dice box. And this is just turned inside out, and resin then just dribbled kind of over top sporadically. My thought is after this is just washed with a couple of different blues, it's really going to look icy and cold. I haven't used it. I didn't use it for Blightfang just because of the timing. It wasn't 100%. That was not set when I wanted to start getting this one based so that I could get it moved on to the next space. Thank you. I do appreciate that. So that base is made out of resin. Let's see. I know we're getting close, but any final questions anybody has? Anything I didn't get to answer or get to show? Again, I'm going to post these minis as they are, so I'm not going to work any more on them, I promise you. But I will get these posted into my chat room on the Discord. Ooh, oh, two questions here. So do you ever use hot glue for ice and water textures? I can tell you I used to, and I used to use it for flame as well, and then wash it with yellows and reds and oranges. But I stopped using hot glue because I don't have as much control. Hot glue is great, but you don't have as much control without burning your hands. So for me, it wasn't as, it's a great tool to use, but I've just found things that I prefer to use with, resins and painting, as well as bits of, plastics and things like that. There are lots of other things that fit my needs. So I haven't had to use hot glue for quite a while. And then when I say sealed, what do I use? I use Tester's Dull Coat. That's my go-to for a couple of reasons. I've used it for a long time, so I'm very familiar with it and the conditions that I need to be in to have it work really well, and availability. It's readily available for me. Let's see, any other questions that we got? No, thank you, Maud, for adding the link up there. As I said, these minis, I will post a photo of them within the next few minutes so you can see how we got, and I'll have a little bit better lighting so you can actually see the effects of both the flocking and the static grass as well as the paint on the dirt that we did. And any questions that you have, shout them out to me. I don't mind at all. I'm going to be enjoying the expo all week long. And let's see, could you repeat the sealed products again? Oh, yes. So I use Tester's Dull Coat specifically, but there are a lot of other ones on the market. You want to get a couple of them and find out what works best in your area, because ambient temperature and humidity and everything will have an impact on it. So play around with them. And again, if you have painted your bow sister, make sure you post that picture, because my favorite sculpt, I love to see them. In the meantime, thank you for joining. I do appreciate it. I hope it was helpful and informative. I hope that everybody gets to take something on from the expo and put it on the tabletop, where I hope to see you. And in the chat, make sure to let me know where your adventures take you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Maud. Thank you, Sonia. All right, I'm going to pop out of here, but I will be on the Discord. If anybody needs anything, just give a yell. Thanks, everybody.